Hello and welcome to the video. I'm VillainTheory and today we're talking everything Halloween, scary, all that kind of thing. I've got 5 spooky scenarios for you guys, 4 scary decks to go alongside it. Now, you don't have to use, these decks with these scenarios and vice versa. Use what you like, but hopefully it's going to be interesting. Hopefully it's going to be fun. If you're watching this when the video is coming out, we have Halloween, coming up very soon. So hopefully this might be a fun thing to do at the weekend. But otherwise, maybe they're just interesting scenarios to play or decks to try. So here we go. Up first, we have what I'm calling Trick or Treat, which is a green goblin, but with a twist. So this is mutagen formula as the base scenario, but we're changing goblin gimmicks for goblin gear. Now, this does introduce the advanced glider and remote navigation, which brings in the advanced glider, which, if you're not aware, are pretty infamous cards in Marvel Champions. They're not the most popular. So if you find green goblin mutagen formula, already challenging, I suggest removing those cards. And if you just don't like those cards, just remove them as well. What we want from Goblin Gear are the new pumpkin, weapons that Green Goblin can use. Green Goblin is just a, someone ready to trick or treat in a Halloween costume, and he's got plenty of tricks. So that's really where the scenario is kind of coming from to begin with. We're also including the Streets of Mayhem and Longshot modular as well as additional kind of bonus modulars. And we're going to explain how that works. But first of all, we just got the, the glider, the advanced glider, very infamous. If you guys aren't into it, just remove it. But if you like the thrill, if you like a little bit of horror, keep it in there and see what happens. But this thing can be pretty deadly, even with, mutagen Green Goblin as opposed to Venom Goblin. But really how the scenario is meant to work is that, everything the villain is doing is kind of the trick. They've got a lot of nasty things going on, especially with Goblin Gear. You can see the smoke bombs here. But we've also got treats. So if you get Longshot as your encounter card, that's a good thing. And the Streets of Mayhem can either be good or bad, kind of depending on your character and the situation, but for the most part, the ones that boost your attack and forwarding, I would say are actually beneficial to the player because, between readying your characters and, having allies, generally you will attack or thwart more times than the villain will attack or scheme, so you'll get more benefit than they will. Whereas, the things which, give retaliate or I think it's steady on the other environments that, come in with Streets of Mayhem, those typically benefit the villain more because you're attacking them more, and you tend to stun and confuse them more than they stun you, especially in this scenario with these modulars. I think there's like one card that can stun you. So definitely, things can work in your favor or they can work in the other, in the villain's favor. And that's kind of the basis of this scenario. As a deck, I'm recommending that you could use against this scenario, but also generally in Halloween or whenever you want any kind of fun deck, honestly. I really like this deck. This is my Spider-Woman card Dracula deck, and this is the only deck of these, on this video, which I've actually published on Marvel CDB. And this deck is basically turning Spider-Woman into a vampire and, treating your allies as if they are vampires as well. So how this works is we have the upgrade that came with Phoenix pinned down, which is something you attach to minions to reduce their attack. So you're looking to, find minions, find prey to, drink from, and pin them down and then bring it or, drink from them. That will give you your cards, very fitting that they bring it is, the red, aggression card, for what it's representing here as a vampire. So you're pinning down these minions and you're drinking the cards from them is kind of the idea. You've got Looking for Trouble and Angela to help find, your victims. You've got characters like Daredevil and Tigra who kind of heal up, when they interact with minions. So, they're also, part of your vampire. What's a group of vampires called? A murder of vampires? I don't know, a flock? But that's kind of the theme here. And we've got Blade who, is here for the vampire trait he has. And he needs a physical resource before he can attack or thwart, or, you have to discard him. And I think that really represents, him as a vampire needing blood. And in that same vein, we've got What Doesn't Kill Me, which requires a physical resource. So, there's a lot of vampiric action going on here. And just think this deck's really fun. I really enjoy this. So, yeah, I fully recommend this one. And I think it works well against, Green Goblin, trick or treat scenario there, just because there's going to be a lot of minions. So you can really, get a lot of targets for pin down very easy and still have targets left over for, Tigra to take out and deal with. So pretty fun, you kind of just managing how many minions can you deal with and keep getting cards from. And even the readies from like What Doesn't Kill Me works really well with Spider-Woman, who just boosts her stats up quite significantly on most turns, up to, on average, she'll have 3 attack, 3 forwarding. So that's this deck. Next up, we have Night at the Museum, which is Personal Nightmare modular, combined with Escape from the Museum scenario. And The name is a bit of a pun, I think, on the movie, but really, I was going for kind of an Arkham kind of feel here. Arkham Horror, if you play the other LCG by Fantasy Flight Games, very, otherworldly horror, kind of, creepy, mysterious. Things don't always make sense. And that's what I'm trying to go for here. Already in Escape the Museum, we have this library labyrinth, which is, kind of, trying to find your way through it. I think that's really good in terms of theme. And it has many copies of the Impossible Geometry encounter card, which, adds to the strangeness of what's going on. And we're just adding a lot of scary stuff on top of that. So normally Night at the Museum has the Menagerie Medley modular set, which is a very nasty modular set and adds a lot of confuse. And that's what prevents you from defeating the main scheme so easily, which is kind of the objective of this scenario. So to counteract that, we've added telepathy along with personal nightmare, and it's just, it increases his scheme by 1, which, adds more threat to the main scheme, which, slows down how you're going to try and win a scenario. But also because he gets retaliate, it's going to be less appealing to defeat the collector to get that extra threat removal from doing so. So those things are all kind of slowing him down. And I think the telepathy theme really works with kind of the horror, scariness, kind of messing with the mind and things not making sense. But also, look at the art on telepathy. Both got slicked back hair. They both got the same kind of facial hair, more or less. I think it just fits pretty well, if I'm honest. And then we've got Personal Nightmare, which I kind of, talked about the theme already, but, we've got a lot of scary, strange things happening here, a lot of illusions and not what's real, what's not. And yeah, I think this is pretty fun. It's probably about on par with, the regular, Collector 2 Escape from the Museum scenario, but I do think it might be slightly easier. But again, I've not played it back to back, with the same deck, so it's hard to get an exact, opinion on that, but that would be my kind of interpretation for you guys to make your decision on how you want to approach it. You can even just remove telepathy if you want a slightly easier time here. And I should add that some of these scenarios, as we saw with Green Goblin, Trick or Treat, some of these are having extra modulars more than what it would normally recommend, and you are allowed to do that. Now, too many can really dilute the deck. You get a really sort of random mix of cards. You'll never get those extra acceleration tokens. Things can get out of whack, a little bit crazy. But in terms of the Trick or Treat scenario, all the Streets of Mayhem and Longshot, they have Surge on them, so they kind of they appear, but then you get another card. So in actual fact, you actually probably move through the encounter deck quicker because Goblin Gear has less cards than Goblin Gimmicks actually. So just keep that kind of thing in mind. I have tried to keep in balance of the encounter deck size as we go, and still try and do some creative things with it for spooky times and Halloween. So the next deck I want to talk about is Shadowcat. I think, Justice obviously matches up really well into Escape the Museum, which you win through boarding. You can still win with any kind of deck, but this obviously does pretty well. And the whole idea with picking Shadowcat here is I kind of wanted to go for something, spectral, like a phantom or a ghost. And Shadowcat can phase through things, Shadowcat Surprise, we've got this kind of scary factor. But she also works really well with the card Stealth Strike and Scare Tactics, which I think play into that a lot. But what I also realized while making that deck is that a lot of the Justice allies are kind of spooky. We've got, Banshee, the name alone, I think, speaks for itself. Wolfsbane is basically, looks like a werewolf to me. Daredevil is, that has got to be, I'm pretty sure some of you guys watching this have probably worn a Halloween costume very similar to that, right? So we've kind of got Shadowcat defending here, or her allies do a lot of the work, with a lot of scary stuff going on around that and phasing in and out. So hopefully this is a pretty fun deck. And Justice decks changed quite a bit from solo to multiplayer, I would say more than any other aspect. So I've got this multiplayer version of it here for you guys. Very similar, changed a couple of allies. We brought in Wraith, Wraith is also obviously a very good ally for Halloween based on the name. Gets better in multiplayer, I think. And we've got Spider-Man. Spider-Man's basically a Halloween costume, Green Goblin, his nemesis, is basically a Halloween costume. It all works together in that regard. But General Justice, the multiplayer version, has slightly tweaked allies and a lot more forwarding and less damage. So you can do the the Justice thing of removing threat. If you want to tweak it for 2-player, 3-player, 4-player, you can fine tune it for exact player counts. But in general, I think this will do pretty well at any player count. 2-player, maybe slightly too much forwarding. 3 or 4-player, maybe you don't have enough skilled investigators as you would like. But you guys can tweak it as you need. Next up, we have what I'm calling Frankenstein's Monster. Now, this came together last year when I put a post up on Reddit for people to suggest, Halloween scenarios and, characters and things to play on Halloween. And someone said Zola's, the perfect mad scientist. Somebody else said, Tombstone's, basically Frankenstein. So I was like, we should put those together. So not exactly an original thought here from me, but nonetheless, I think it was worth mentioning and pretty straightforward, honestly. we have Zola, who brings in a lot of minions, which means Tombstone has a very high chance of entering play. And Tombstone is pretty nasty with 9 hit points, 3 attack, 2 scheme. And if he damages you have to discard some kind of card from your hand, which is not good. And to make this harder, I've even got this optional rule, which you can choose to ignore or use as you like, which is when Tombstone is discarded, shove him back into the encounter deck. I did put a limit on that just in case things get a little bit weird. You know, if you're down to 2 cards in the encounter deck and, you know, I don't want you to have to keep picking him up and discarding him like several times in a row. But this is just because the whole theme of this is about Frankenstein. Tombstone is representing Frankenstein because of, you know, the visual similarities. So you just get more Frankenstein in this Frankenstein-inspired scenario, which is why that is an optional rule. And, you know, especially if you want more of a challenge. But I will say Zola, especially in solo, is very challenging already. So, you know, be a little bit cautious with that. But we can see, you know, if Tombstone starts to get some of the upgrades and things, the attachments from Zola, neurological implants is on the screen here, he can get very, very, very scary. And, you know, Zola's experiments, all those kind of cards really fit the theme we are looking for here. And to fight this one, I have recommended a Gamora deck. Now, this is a bit of a weird Gamora deck, and it might struggle slightly if you're not used to this style, just because Gamora in leadership is very unusual, and Zola solo, and especially with, you know, Tombstone as Frankenstein, you know, that's going to be a little bit tricky. However, I do think this is a really fun, interesting deck that can do very well here. So the whole idea of this, you know, it's Necromora, Necromancer. You're raising the dead. So that's how we're interpreting Regroup here. Regroup is a very powerful card, but I wanted to try and find a way to use it well in solo play. And there are, you know, various ways to do it. But what I thought was interesting here is Gamora can take Regroup, which is a leadership card, and take all 3 copies of it. But then she can take Bait and Switch and Toe-to-Toe because of her, you know, deck building. You know, she breaks the normal requirements. She can take attacks or forwarding, up to 6 of them total from different aspects. The Bait and Switch is a forwarding card, which actually makes the villain attack. And Toe-to-Toe is an aggression and damage attack card, which makes an enemy attack. So you can play Regroup, which causes your allies, when they're defeated, to return to your hand. And then you can make the villain attack to defend with them and get them all back to your hand. So you need some pretty fun combos with this. There's a lot of card draw allies here and just generally powerful allies, both to, you know, find Bait and Switch and Toe-to-Toe alongside Regroup. Also just find general events and stuff to deal with problems like, I don't know, Tombstone. But also kind of to prop the deck up because Gamora in leadership is a little bit awkward. So getting those powerful cards in there, I think kind of offsets that. Let's just play into this kind of unique style of Gamora. Up next, we have what I'm calling the Wicked Witch. And we couldn't have, you know, kind of a scary, you know, Halloween kind of themed video without a witch. And there's not a lot of female villains. And here is one who is a mystic. So, you know, this was kind of a no-brainer. So the base scenario is Hela, but we're changing it up a lot in quite strange ways, including Doctor Strange's Nemesis set and Scarlet Witch's Nemesis set, both of which we're going to include here as extra modulars. Normally she would have Legions of Hell and Frost Giants, but we're substituting one of those out for Fantasy, one of them out for one of the Nemesis sets, and then we're adding the other Nemesis set in just as a little bonus. And, you know, they're not huge Nemesis sets, especially Scarlet Witches, and this is because they add a lot of spells into the encounter deck. So breaking, you know, kind of, you know, the, you know, rules of the game, you know, you're not really meant to use Nemesis sets as, you know, modulars, but you definitely can. A lot of them work really well and can be really fun. And as an additional rule, and you've got a couple of options with this, but Doctor Strange's Nemesis side scheme wants to interact with the Invocation deck, and if you're not playing Doctor Strange here, that's not going to happen. It still has, I think, an acceleration token or something, so it's not a huge deal, but what I've been doing is taking that side scheme, I forgot what it was called, taking that side scheme and just putting it in the victory display to begin with, which means Hela has a +1 boost to all her stats immediately, which makes a bit more pressure on the player to get moving because you're dealing with a higher pressure villain initially. It can mean, you know, once you get through all of Hela's normal victory display side schemes, that you have a very scary, very powered up villain. I think on Expert, she reaches 6 scheme, 6 attack. So, you know, that is pretty scary, but a lot of her encounter cards otherwise, you know, when you start off, you know, they basically do next to nothing if she doesn't have any side schemes in that victory display. So this sort of stops, you know, a lot of people, you know, gamifying it. You know, I think it adds a bit of pressure and ups the difficulty. But if you already, again, struggle with Hela, you know, maybe she's a good difficulty for you already, what I would suggest is taking that side scheme still, and instead of adding, you know, it's called Open the Dark Dimension, I should add. Instead of adding that to the victory display, just remove it from the game entirely. And that way, she's not going to have any kind of initial boost, but you're still getting all those fun, you know, spell casting, magical mystic nemesis, modular sets in there for the theme. So we can see a few of the kind of magical things that we get by adding fantasy and, the nemesis sets here. I think they're all pretty fitting. There's even more than this kind of work in terms of, magic and things going on. So I quite enjoy that. And we also have the fantasy modular in general, which adds, goblins, trolls, things that a witch might associate with, or, maybe do her bidding, anything like that. It's kind of the fantasy theme we're really going for here. And then we have the dragon. And witches and dragons, in a lot of media definitely have some crossover. I think we have, Disney's Maleficent, and the dragon card definitely looks very reminiscent of the dragon. I couldn't believe it after Googling it. Like, I don't know how many dragons breathe green fire, but these are the only two that I know of. I'm sure there are plenty, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And, anyone who loves Dragon Age, will probably get this reference. So I thought that was pretty fun as well. And fantasy is just a really, really fun modular to throw in there. And who better to fight a witch than another witch? So Scarlet Witch's Nemesis set is already included, which makes Scarlet Witch a really good matchup here because Shadow of the Past isn't going to immediately pull, her Nemesis and the side scheme into play all at once. Shadow of the Past basically becomes, a non-card for her. It kind of just surges onwards, and you kind of ignore it. So that already gives Scarlet Witch an advantage here. So if you find this challenging, Scarlet Witch will be a good matchup. And this deck in particular is all about summoning. And, I think a lot of people have done these kind of decks already, but I tried to really include a lot of, sort of slightly Halloween or horror kind of themed allies here. We've got Adam Warlock, who is a mystic. We've got Black Knight and, Dark Knights and Warlocks are all very, fantasy and, potentially scary. We've got Deathlock, who is, a cyborg, Ghost Spider, emphasis on ghost. We've got all these kind of things going on here and, costumed people. And we've got Summoning Spell, Call for Backup, and Chaos Magic to get them into play for, cheap. And we've got Call for Aid, because a lot of them are Avengers, to help you find one when Chaos Magic is in your hand. And that's basically the deck. Ronan and Deathlock can both benefit from the upgrades, giving you some kind of extra use there. And Scarlet Witch pretty strong. So even though Hela is going to hit very hard, especially if you put that Nemesis side scheme in the victory display immediately, between the status cards from Hexbolt and, her Magic Shield and a good amount of allies to block with, even if you don't necessarily want to block with them immediately after playing them, she's going to have options there to maneuver, deal with all these side schemes and things as well, because she's got pretty strong forwarding overall. So that is this deck. Next up, we have the final scenario, and I should say Scarlet Witch was the final deck there. But the final scenario I've called Bad Moon Rising. And if you've listened to the podcast I do with Nelson, Shadow of the Cast, you might have heard about this one. And this is taking a new scenario, Morlock Siege, and really upping the stakes of, really putting the Morlocks in some real danger here, because we're introducing the Horror and Beastie Boys modular sets. And I will say, if you want a slightly easier time, maybe quite a lot of easier time, honestly, you could remove the Mojo Files environment encounter card, which is part of the Horror modular set. That, when that comes into play, gives all minions quick strike immediately. So the Morlocks, who draw all attacks to them, will suddenly be in a lot of danger if everything has a quick strike. Otherwise, normally only one minion from the Beastie Boys set will have a quick strike, which is a bit more manageable. So it really depends on what you're looking for. It's kind of the advanced glider thing from Trick or Treat, that first scenario I showed. If you want that really dangerous card that's going to, twist things, shake things up, you can leave it in there, which I would softly recommend. But if you're not into those kind of very dangerous encounter cards, then in this case there's no shame in just removing that and having a smoother game overall. So horror, I think, obviously fits Halloween very, very easily, but let's talk about it in detail with this scenario, because Werewolf Pack defeats an ally you control. If the only ally you control is a Morlock, that Morlock is gone. Now, fortunately, solo play, you get 2 Morlocks. In multiplayer, other people get Morlocks. You only need 1 alive to, succeed on the scenario. So I don't think this is too punishing, especially if you actually, play other allies as we go. And all these decks have shown so far, although you can use any deck, do have a good amount of allies. So you should have a safety buffer, but there's definitely a very real threat here that Werewolf Pack presents. It just defeats an ally you control when it's revealed. Now, it's interesting how the interaction goes with the victory keyword. What I believe happens is Werewolf Pack defeats the ally, and because the Morlock ally has the victory condition on there, I believe it gets put into the victory display. However, I do think encounter cards can get stuff out of the victory display. So after you complete defeating the Morlock ally and putting it in the victory display, I then believe you put it face down under Werewolf Pack. Now, I'm not 100% sure of that because it's a bit of a weird interaction. And I'm honestly not 100% sure what happens when you then discard the Morlock from underneath Werewolf Pack. I've just been putting it into my deck, but I don't know if it's ever actually part of your deck or just put into play, which I think, as it belongs to Morlock Siege, technically go into the encounter deck, which is a little strange. I don't know what happened if you revealed it. So it's a little bit of a strange interaction there, but it's a fun kind of combination. So I think however you want to resolve it, as long as you're certain on what you want to do before you play the scenario, I think it's pretty fun to do this. And then we've got Kraken, which makes all characters take damage, puts the Morlocks at threat, but then can heal all characters when defeated, which is kind of also interesting for healing the Morlocks. So kind of like that interaction. So we've got a lot of scary goings on there, and then Beastie Boys just adds to the trouble, double trouble, you could say. These stun and confuse a lot of characters, and then interact with making those stunned or confused characters take even more damage. So Mandrill and Double Trouble encounter cards have a real threat of putting these status cards onto your Morlock allies, and then Beast Mode, the side scheme, can make them take more damage overall, and it's generally just going to slow you down, because Morlock Siege is, being honest, a very easy scenario overall. So it's just going to add a little bit more extra difficulty and slow you down while bad things happen to your Morlocks. So you really have to try and protect those and watch out for the nasty things that the horror set can do. That brings us to the end of the video. Here's a sort of just summary of the names, at least, of the scenarios. Hopefully they were interesting. Got some interesting sort of interactions between mod sets and scenarios that you could use anytime, as well as, at Halloween. And in terms of difficulty, I would probably say it's tricky because they've all got these like slightly scary elements. I've definitely upped the difficulty overall on most of these. But I'd probably say Night at the Museum is probably the easiest, followed by maybe Bad Moon Rising. Or if you've got plenty of ways to block attacks, I don't think Wicked Witch would be too difficult at all. Solo play Frankenstein's monster is definitely quite scary, and depending on what you do with Advanced Glider, you've got to be careful with Trick or Treat, but they're all very doable, especially on standard mode. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. And then we've got the decks. I think most of them match up pretty well with most of these scenarios to some degree. Even if you need forwarding, any one is justice, but they all have good threat removal and so on. So, and they all work, I should say, quite well together in multiplayer. Regroup of the Gamora deck, speaks for itself, but they are all buildable with one full collection of cards. There's no overlap to my knowledge. I tried to make sure that, if you wanted a 4-player game, someone could play each of those. And yeah, hopefully these were interesting. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.